I'm starting to see some of them. I told my grandfather.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Well, his when he was in the hospital, they stayed all the time in the hospital. He got some trips to scare the dog. Yeah, when we get the dog back.
All right, quiet. Thank you. Boy, that worked easy. Okay, this is a joint work session with City Council, and City Council is here with us. And so we are going to go through that to start with, and it's, in your commercial district rezoning. Everybody have that? Okay. Council, do you have anything you want to say prior? No? Does the commission have anything you want to say prior to taking a motion? Everybody read it?
I would love to kind of open up with some discussion and kind of preface what we want to talk about tonight on this. So council has already had a couple work sessions on this topic and really didn't want to get into specifics until we got to the planning commission level, but wanted to have some more discussion with the planning commission before it got to public hearing and really into formal ordinances. So I would love to give you guys just a little background on why we're doing this, which is what I talked with to council about their last special work session about a month ago. So a few things for the commercial rezoning. It is called out within our strategic plan on a couple things for specific elements that are in the commercial rezoning, specific to the pedestrian paths and crosswalks that we have built into this, as well as the incentive for developing permanent outdoor space for restaurants. So you'll see that kind of built in within these ordinances. Also the comprehensive plan in the 2015 version and in the 2021 update talks about parking requirements being the limiter for downtown commercial and growth in new businesses. Also talks about protecting community character and celebrating the eclectic nature of Folly. And basically how max height development and requiring that grade construction along Center Street really helps activate the street and match existing patterns for zoning. And then regulating business activities that may affect livability in both the commercial and residential areas, specifically to rentals. So over the past 5 years, just did a really brief report scan of the new buildings in the commercial district. We had 9, 7 of those are short-term rentals. So that does kind of pair with our short-term rental conversation, but just over looking at what the trends are and what the highest and best use of our commercial properties are right now, and looking at redevelopment in the future. So there are some bigger short-term rentals that were legally permitted in the downtown commercial on Hudson and Huron that are very large scale. They started building piles last week, so people can start to the scale of that. And before we had any more construction go into that way, we wanted to really evaluate and see what redevelopment looked like, as that's what we're going to be seeing mostly in Folly as we're pretty built out. We wanted to preserve land for commercial growth. Residential units tend to be the highest and best use in the commercial district, and this is just a good way for the city to evaluate if that's what they want, that standalone residential in the commercial district. Outdated setbacks and max heights allow buildings that are too close to neighboring uses and too tall for Center Street. So that's how we got the old Wiki now Taco Boy, and a few other buildings. And then lot coverage requirements from Center Street would allow 50% lot coverage on full-size lots. So separating island commercial and downtown commercial to 35% lot coverage for island commercial, does help with flooding, also just kind of spreads out that density within that. So that's kind of the whys and how it relates to some of our plans. And then briefly run through the proposed changes in the downtown commercial and the island commercial districts. And then we can start getting into specifics if you have specific things that council members and planning commissioners want to talk about. So, and they have two ordinances before you guys to speak about, one pertaining to downtown commercial and one pertaining to island commercial. So the biggest thing is just realigning the boundaries for the downtown commercial district, so it only fronts Center Street. Center Street operates differently than the rest of the commercial district. So we would only allow residential development if it's paired with a commercial use. So we don't have any standalone residential uses that current buildings would be converted to. But residential would be allowed if development is paired with a commercial use, like a coffee shop or an office building on that ground floor. Along the new smaller downtown commercial, which is just along Center Street, would limit the total height of buildings to 34 feet from grade to prevent large structures such as like a new city hall being built or that kind of massing along the street. This would be paired with limiting new buildings to only 2 stories to prevent large floor areas and overwhelming density, and it would count roof decks as a story to prevent 3rd-story roof decks where sound carries further. We would require buildings to be built at street level. We're allowed by flood code to preserve character and scale on our main street. Remove all standalone residential uses. Modify lot area requirements and setbacks to reflect the new allowable uses in smaller districts. Allow greater lot coverage by encouraging semi-public spaces along Center Street, so think porches, decks, and courtyards to kind of activate the street and go along with that community character called out in the comprehensive plan. Internal pedestrian walkway requirement is eliminated as it is no longer applicable to Center Street due to the lot sizes. And then allow commercial development with no parking. Center Street is the main pedestrian business street, and the lots are too small or lack access for parking. So the smaller limits for building will limit the density rather than parking. Moving to the next ordinance, which is for the newer, larger IC district. So this would again only allow residential development if compared with commercial uses. This gives us mixed use, different types of commercial spaces within that. Limit the total building height to 40 feet and only allow a maximum of 3 stories. So still taller than what is proposed on Center Street, but not large masses of buildings. Rooftop patios, canopies, and then drive-under parking also count as a story. This would allow for mixed-use commercial spaces while limiting massive structures. Requiring new development and substantial improvements in the IC district to install a pervious pedestrian path along the right-of-way to increase connectivity and safety throughout the island. The city is currently going through a full master planning of pedestrian paths and that design, and so basically whoever has the new development or substantial improvements within that district would just adopt and like build their part. So we would have all of that mapping done. It would just be applied to what the city standards are. Eliminate single and 2-family dwellings as allowable uses in IC district. Existing non-conforming uses can substantially improve and keep their use. This is already something that's outlined in Chapter 168. So existing single-family, existing duplexes, residents that live in that area would not be affected by this. If they're blown over by a hurricane, they could rebuild. If they substantially improve, they would be able to keep that use. They would just have to comply with the flood ordinance. So they wouldn't have to sacrifice that use. And then increase setbacks from 0 feet to 10 feet. So in some circumstances, the side setback can be increased to 20 feet depending on where they abut, if it's abutting next to a strictly residential zoning district. So that's the main changes that are being proposed. Another slight caveat that I did want to touch on is Bowen's Island is affected by this change, as they're currently zoned to island commercial. The mayor and I did meet with some members of the community last Monday to determine what that rezoning needs to look like. I did send out, or Wes sent out, thank you Wes, a resolution that was passed in 2019 and a draft letter from 2019 asking, or really authorizing staff to explore the rezoning of Marsh Island residential. We would like to explore that, and also after conversations with the residents, there might even be a cleaner, more efficient way than Marsh Island residential to achieve what their goals are. So we're gonna send letters out outlining that information to the Bowens Island residents, whether that be Marsh Island residential, residential 2-family, or kind of anything in between. So if someone just walked in, you might be hearing from the Planning Commission during the public comment. So just wanted to touch on that, that we are aware of the island commercial of Bowens Island, and we're working with them throughout this process as they are affected. And that's all I have.
Okay, are there any questions in reference to what she's just gone over? Are there any questions you want to direct?
And so this is just a really good time to really workshop. This is a work session. So this again isn't a formal public hearing to vote on these ordinances. It's really to make sure what is drafted makes sense and is in line with the goals of the city. So we can get as nitty gritty as you guys want. We have about 45 minutes to really kind of unpack everything that's in this. So happy to have that dialogue.
Why would the island commercial have a 40-foot limitation when everything else has 34-foot?
So that goes with the promoting of the mixed use, to be able to get, even allow people to elevate. Some houses can be max 40 feet from the center of the road, but it's that heated and cooled that's 34 feet. That's for those residential uses. 40 feet is allowed currently in the dimensional standards. I don't think that's changed from max height for island commercial.
And so, Katie, correct me if I'm wrong. The idea here is that 40 feet is already allowed. We're lowering the buildings on Center Street, the total height, because we're requiring them to be built at grade. We're leaving the height along here because these outside of Center Street, the buildings are elevated. So the total height is 40 feet above grade, but those are elevated buildings. Here on Center Street, the height would be lower because those buildings are going to be built at grade within the A zone, flood zone. There are a few properties, I think, still in the B zone on the other side of the red light, and so those would, they're going to have to be elevated enough so that that lower height limit, but the rest of Center Street can be built at grade, and so we wanted that height measured from grade for lower overall. So the same amount of building, but some are elevated, some aren't.
Yeah, so the current wording is 34 feet from the top of the living floor surface. So that means you could elevate for an island commercial, you could elevate 10 feet to drive under, and then ultimately your building would be, and have it heated and cooled for those 34 feet, you could have it at 44 feet from grade. So we're limiting 40 feet from grade as the max height. So it's actually lower than what is currently authorized in some situations.
So in that island commercial, by the time you have the new proposed setbacks and you have the requirement for parking, how is it going to be feasible to develop a mixed-use property that has both commercial and residential on those size lots?
So it just depends on how intense you want that. The parking requirements are determined by size of the business and the square footage of the business. So you can have a coffee shop and those parking requirements, which I do have in front of me, are not that intense because residential is only one spot per bedroom. You don't have to worry about septic as well in the commercial district. So maybe you need to fit 6 parking spots, and you can, usually I've seen it done where these lots can fit, 4 or 6 on the side there with a single drive aisle. But that's for the architects and the developers to figure out.
And is double stacking allowed up to 2 cars in that scenario?
They would still have to be able to get out. I would have to look at the zoning ordinance to see what that looks like. I don't think you could do it for the commercial uses, potentially for the residential.
And so is the city saying that it's desirable to be, let's say, second block west, to have a coffee shop in the middle of that residential area with residences over it? Is that what the city's wanting our future to look like on that part of the island?
That's a good question.
That's not what city council has asked for at all.
Okay,
That might be what is coming from this, but I can go ahead and tell you, and I don't mind speaking if you got the time. I don't like it because it does increase commercialism. I think we're really at a tilt of what we can handle as an island based on 12-month year. You know, yeah, maybe in the summertime we have a massive influx of tourists, we can handle more commercialism, but we do not need to make it easier to spread commercialism in the residential areas, in my opinion. And a lot of this opens up the possibility for that to happen. It's one of those things where, you know, you try and fix one problem, but you create 3 more in the process. I think there's a way we can just, you know, deal with some height restrictions, setback requirements, things of that sort, and achieve a lot of the goals that the city is trying to get, not necessarily city council. I think we need to look at infrastructure before we do anything. You know, you already have our major intersection flooding every time it drizzles, and you want to make it easier to build larger buildings there, no pervious areas. The rainwater's got to go somewhere, and it's just going to make it worse. And that's not fair to the businesses or the traffic, you know, that we deal with right now. We have that project on our table. It's a $2 million project, you know, a $2 million drainage pipe improvement. So it's a substantial leap to be able to even think about doing this, in my opinion. I would never vote for it until that infrastructure is you know, in the process of being alleviated. The part about tying in with our strategic plan is a little inaccurate. When we did our strategic plan with outdoor restaurant spaces, that was during the pandemic, and we're looking at, we closed off parking spaces and things of that sort, and each business had their own outdoor space. It was not a space where Joe Blow could just come by and drink his coffee and take up a seat. That was designed, our intention was to have those spaces kind of designated for each business that wanted to do that.
Well, wait a minute now, we didn't do the strategic plan during the COVID.
We did it before, but that's when we had outdoor spaces.
We didn't have outdoor spaces in the strategic plan because of COVID. We created the COVID spaces because of COVID. That wasn't part of the strategic plan.
But the intent behind them wasn't to have staff and have a set porch on the front of a restaurant anybody could use. It was to have spaces that people were really enjoying the outdoor space. It doesn't tie in exactly as people are being led to.
But what I'm saying is we're not talking about strategic plan. We're not talking about taking up parking spaces for outdoor coffee drinking spaces.
No.
It was more like the old Taco Boy where you had a porch.
But that's their porch.
I said Taco Boy.
Yeah,
you have a porch.
Right. It's theirs, but that's their business. It's not open to the entire public. It's open to the public. They're spending money on staff.
Councilman Rich, and to that, Mark, and it may be just a matter of semantics with public and semi-public. This proposal isn't forcing people to have their patio open to everyone. It's encouraging those kind of quasi-public porches, spaces. If Bollywood was torn down and you wanted to rebuild it with a patio just for Bollywood folks there, that would count under this proposal as a way to get activity and public activity on the street. So it's not forcing people to build public spaces, it's encouraging people to build quasi-public.
Now that we're talking about that narrative, then I withdraw that part because it wasn't how it was originally portrayed. And that's why I was kind of like, okay, that's not what we were talking about. That is more along the lines of what we were talking about.
All right, well, thank you for.
So that narrative, I will gladly withdraw that portion. So it does loosely fit the strategic plan, yes. But a lot of the stuff can be addressed without a major commercial change. I think you can look into height requirements and setbacks and alleviate a lot of these issues. We don't need a coffee shop at 2.5. I mean, really, I think we can downgrade some of that, to be honest with you, what we have now, instead of trying to make it easier.
It's all commercial already.
Yeah, and I just want to follow up on what Councilman Rich says. He's right. We'd actually have to downgrade those properties because they're already commercial. So the coffee shop in the residential district, that could happen tomorrow. This would just say that you couldn't build only a house or a duplex. So if we want to prevent commercialization and offer people the opportunity to continue to develop those properties in a residential way, that's good. It'll keep the commercial out because they'll always have the option to build a single family house or duplex. This was taken from the idea is we have limited commercial space. We want to eliminate them being purely residential because when they take up all the commercial space, as long as the rental is the best use, it's gonna be built as a rental.
But
So
why
this
do they
would
wanna
say-
eliminate the residential space? That's what
not-
I'm struggling with.
Right, and then the stated goal was to keep them from flipping to only residential use. So we're saying it's great if you want to build a single family house on this lot, but you have to do it as a unit over a commercial space to preserve that commercial space.
I
If
don't
we don't
understand that at all.
Right, and if we don't feel our inventory of commercial lots is limited, and we're okay with the conversion of more commercial lots to residential uses, then we just take out that proposal and that'll go back.
I think just going back and looking at an island that's struggling to keep somewhere, don't quote me, around 3,500 residents, where we already have at last count 27 bars and restaurants. Maybe, as DJ said, we're at capacity, and looking at, with the issues of short-term rental and traffic and J-trippers and all the things, this seems like it's making that bucket bigger rather than making that bucket smaller, unless I'm missing something.
No, I think it's just a matter of competing goals, because we also have people who email, why is there no office space on Folly Beach? Why are there only t-shirts and restaurants on Folly Beach? It's because our prime commercial space is used, and we're in danger of our other commercial space looking to be 3-unit rental complexes. That 3-unit rental complex can now never be an office or any other type of commercial. So it's just competing interests, which is certainly for you folks and the public to decide.
The illustration to his point is, look right behind the Crab Shack, where that whole commercial space was taken up and just built with short-term rental for properties. It's getting ready to happen again right behind, back in there, and where the old hardware store used to be. So that was the idea behind that. You gotta put some kind of commercial in there if you're gonna have some kind of residential to go with it.
And I see that. So is this, Paul, is this trying to close that loophole, but like somehow extending it over to 2nd Street West?
Yeah, I think the ultimate goal is to prevent people taking advantage of the current ordinances to build multiple unit short-term rentals where they don't have the set.
So in the extension, that property is already zoned commercial. Someone could, in theory, go put a commercial unit on it right now today. They could also develop it as a rental complex. And so the choice would then be between which do we as a community prefer as the quote highest and best use of that property, a rental complex or a commercial use. Both have advantages and disadvantages. And so that's the problem you guys face.
Do we have any information from the short-term rental committee that would help inform our decision on?
They have not finished their recommendations. But yeah, we are not expanding the commercial district. We're actually down zoning more than we're up zoning, within this commercial district. But everything that is, commercial right now that is proposed with the caveat of Bowen's Island is the only thing that would potentially go listed.
And, sorry, I think once we get into more of the public process, once the recommendations are finalized, and we can put out for hearings if any of them survive, some of the preliminary feedback we've heard, probably the most preliminary feedback we've heard from folks is about why would you want to stop people from building residences in the commercial district? So, you're not the only one with that concern. And it may be that piece of this drops out, but the thread of all of this, these are a package of recommendations for discussion, and what we're doing today is exactly, nothing's written in stone, so.
Isn't that the main point though, that y'all are looking at? So if we drop that, like why would we discourage people building residence in the residential houses in the commercial zone? Isn't that the biggest piece of the puzzle that you were trying to fix with this package?
That's a large piece of it.
Because it's that large piece, because that's what I'm saying, that's why I have zero problems just dropping this and adjusting it through other means instead of doing zoning changes and all that and potentially opening up more problems that we're not looking at. When we could just tweak some of what we have and fix some of those issues, or at least make it a little more copacetic.
One piece is the preventing all rentals in the commercial district, but we're also looking into the setbacks and lot coverage and rezoning, lowering the scale and density and intensity of other uses too.
And you're gonna have to separate, if you're gonna do anything, kind of think of it this way, if you're gonna do anything in the commercial district, you're gonna have to separate downtown commercial completely from island commercial in your thought process, because if you start doing setbacks and you say it's gonna be for all the commercial area, you're gonna kill your Center Street businesses, because there's zero setbacks there now, so, you're gonna have to look at that. No matter which angle you try to come at it from, you're gonna have to remember that. And the other one is, to the Marsh Island, or Bowens Island group. Did some of them show up?
That's where are we on that one?
In the beginning, 100 years ago, Mr. Bowen, Mr. Barber was promised a lot of stuff to get them to come in so they could get to the Piggly Wiggly property at the time. And not long after the promise, it's kind of like the Indians. You know, as long as the grass grows and the water flows, you can do this. Well, that didn't work. Not long after that, it got changed. Zoning got changed, and also, as you're thinking about that process, I would try to keep them over here with some of the other ones over here. Just remembering that they kind of got the short end of the stick on trying to do a good deed for the council at the time. It was about 2004, 3, something like
We got
that.
a nice email from them. It looked like was that a consensus from everybody?
I think so.
But we got, it was late this afternoon. We
Yeah,
got
I got it.
if everybody's good with that, we should just adopt that as it is. That's what they wish.
Well, I don't know. They asked me too much.
Well, a little bit. But back to
Just
the other,
kidding. Just
back to
kidding.
the other point, you can always, if it's only setbacks is the issue, you can always have a caveat in your section that says lots on Center Street setbacks are different, instead of creating a different district. Because then you're talking about heights and things of that sort.
Well, but you're basically creating a different district from doing that. But I'm just saying, you gotta
That's the
remember
only
that
thing
in
that's
all your,
different than the other ones.
all your process.
I like the idea of the IC versus the DC, and if I have a choice of what Folly looks like, I would rather it look like anything but what the parking lots on Ashley look like now. I would rather it look like what's happening on Hudson, and it be more residential than, you go down there on a Saturday and it feels like a carnival. With all the parking and the CDB store and the food trucks and stuff on Hudson down the street for me with the new condos and stuff, or dual family dwellings. I'm comfortable with that, and keeping the commercial in the commercial.
To make it residential.
That's where I'm at.
Well, that creates a problem there too.
Everything.
Because
When you pull string A, string B pulls out.
you've got, because they're building multi on that, which takes it out of your single or duplex. As far as our zoning is concerned out here. And, they are a commercial zoning, and they're half a block of a commercial zoning, been that way for a long, long time. But what they're building is commercial. Those condos are commercial.
Unabashedly commercial.
Pardon?
Unabashedly commercial. They're not built
Yeah.
to have full-time residents.
No, you're right. And you wanna go to Bowens Island, we can, thank them for, that got us all the way to the Piggly Wiggly.
I know, but I voted against them back then.
I didn't vote against it this time, but watching.
No, I've been trying to make it feel a little bit.
You leave Bowens Island alone there.
Hey, that was, my intent was not to mess with them. You're the one that comes and said, hey, wait a minute, this is not gonna work, because, the way things are going, so.
You didn't know the grandmama, but, she would have been,
I wish you were here.
one she would have dealt with, would she not?
We get decided real quickly.
Sarah May would have made it go, come on,
But
you guys.
the Councilman Rich wrote about the email from those guys, and I don't know if you see it or not, Katie, but it was pretty much down the line of what we had a discussion on the other day, so it's kind of.
Makes that one really easy.
Are there any other questions that you want to pose?
I do have one other. The requirement of buildings be built at street level on Center Street, which I understand. But when you have a heavy rain and Jack of Cups is putting out, well, we're probably gonna be flooded tomorrow morning, so let's just be closed. Is there a way to keep that street level look and allow them, let's say it was torn down, to build up a couple steps so they could address global warming and climate change and all of those things and still preserve the feel of Center Street? Is there some wiggle room there?
Yeah, I think there's some staff discretion if it's like 2 or 3 steps up. I would still say that would be street level.
Or maybe need to be addressed
Also
in
wraps into
language.
Mr. Rich's comment of we have flooding issues and we have plans that need to be implemented, and we're ready to do that when funding is available, and it would solve some issues, but ultimately some buildings do need to go up high.
Then will the creek still rise? Okay. Anyone else have a comment? Anybody more things?
Question, Katie, so, right now on the island commercial, is the parking requirement changing at all, or is it gonna stay the exact same as what it is currently?
It is currently staying the same.
Okay.
No parking would be required, and that's another section of the ordinance that's not included in your packet.
Right.
So I can send, it's 1660604.
Right.
I can send that out to planning commissioners and council members if they just want to review what the parking requirements and maybe even do like some quick calculations. So we can kind of go back to that, like restaurants. So there are a couple calculations for restaurant parking, but it's 1 for every 200 square feet, including outdoor waiting, seating, and dining areas, or 1 for every 3 people of occupancy, plus 1 for every 2 employees. So that, it can add up quickly, depending on how big.
The idea of a restaurant ever going up, 'cause there's no way.
There's no way that would work.
No way.
Right, and so that's
It's
why.
fine with me. I'm telling you, there's no way.
And so that's what, I don't know if that needs to be, something that comes up in this discussion of like practicability, based on how big our lot sizes are, or how we got to this, or if we want parking to be a limiter, for different commercial uses, because that's what traditionally happens. The only way we got Wiki or now Taco Boys because we didn't have parking requirements in that district when that was proposed.
And is the Folly Hotel subject to those requirements?
Yes. They have a little bit different because it was an existing use, but they do meet that.
It was an existing B&B, now it's a hotel. That's a completely different.
They do
So
meet
if
that.
you're the Folly Hotel.
I like when you pop up and down. It's
Yeah,
very
sorry,
cute.
I just.
He needs
so
to
much
answer
to
that.
share with you guys. I miss being in the room with you.
With property
Folly
requirement?
Hotel, the restaurant space going in there is an accessory use.
As you
to the
cross the
hotel,
bridge.
so it
Oh, that
requires no additional parking. But it's less than 1/3 of the floor area of the building, it's entered through the same entrance as the building, it meets all the standards of accessory use. But as an accessory use, it didn't trigger any additional parking restrictions. So if we need to consider the parking requirements for additional accessory uses, this would be the time to do it. But in theory, if it's an allowable accessory use like food sales are for an inn, if it's less than 1/3 the size of the building, it meets some other requirements, no individual signage, no individual entrance, it doesn't trigger any new parking.
Even if it's a completely new use, because the
It's not
guidelines for a
consistent.
B&B are very different than the guidelines for a hotel.
They
So,
meet.
so food, retail, sales, dining are accessory use stuff, B&B and
Okay.
it's actually more of an accessory use for an inn than B&B.
Okay.
But the parking is definitely something, we had no parking requirements until 2010. We were very fortunate that the development pressures didn't really happen off Center Street, so we had no wikis. And so in 2010, we said, well, wait a minute, why have we frozen our business district with these onerous parking requirements? No one can do anything because the same parking requirements that apply to Center Street apply to 2nd Street West. We need to fix this, and so we took them away to go back to the way they were in the good old days. And things have changed since the good old days. And 2 months later, we got the biggest, probably one of the biggest buildings, definitely the biggest restaurants on the beach, popped down right by the carnival parking lots in a really congested area. And we said, oh, wait a minute, and we do need some parking requirements, and we went backwards. So this idea of separating Center Street with the tiny lots from the rest of the commercial district that have full-size lots is kind of first stab at a middle ground approach for parking. Maybe if you're on Center Street, you don't need that much parking. Then if you're off Center Street, we've got a conceptual plan in our office that shows about 15 spots on a full-size lot with a pretty sizable building. So you can still fit 15, 16 parking spaces on a normal lot and build a building there. So that does allow some use, but it doesn't necessarily allow another super full-size parking lot.
And that's a zero setback.
That's at a zero setback. So, you change the setbacks and then some of the building goes away or some of the parking goes away. But the parking will still be a limiting factor in how intense it can be. So yeah, you can build a restaurant, but it's not gonna be wicky, it's gonna be closer to the drop-in deli or something with a lot fewer seats. So parking, if we wanna get into parking, now's a good time to do it too. There's some other middle ground approach that we can work on. Alright, because our parking standards really, let's be honest, they were boilerplate in 2010, they didn't work, they're still there today.
With the accessory use, can that be open to the public, or is that only a use for the residents of, let's say, the hotel?
It can be, it's open to the public, they just have no outdoor, signage to advertise it. And all food sales have to be indoor, it's an indoor food sales. You have to go in.
So basically, anybody who's a member of the public can use that accessory space.
As legally within the ordinance.
And if we wanted to, we could have an ordinance that limited its use to the residents of that structure.
I don't know how would we do it.
I would squeeze that.
Anybody else have questions or need clarification on anything? We're almost out of time for this portion here.
I have one more question. Do we think any of these changes would promote people demoing the island commercial and rebuilding? Is there any thought or concern about, buildings coming down, new buildings going up?
So that is kind of the thought process behind most of these ordinance changes as redevelopment. So if someone was in the island commercial district and demolished a single family home, they would not be able to rebuild a single family home, voluntarily demolish it. So I would think that these ordinances would make people think twice about demolishing that use, maybe substantially improving that, almost maybe even historic preservation in a way with these small cottages, without getting into like historic preservation, but at least preserving that character.
Yeah, I guess my concern was it might promote people to want to demo the older cottages to build new island commercial uses. But
Not if we get to alter these, it's like I wanna alter.
well, yeah, I mean, I
You
was.
can do it now.
Right, I think that the market would set, maybe there are single family homes that are more advantageous to be closer to the Center Street district, and so those are actually higher in value based on proximity to businesses.
Right.
So I think the market would determine that. I think it could go either way.
But the downtown commercial setbacks would stay the same as they are now, because there's no changes to those right now.
Correct.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, this does not require a vote on our part, this
No,
is just.
It's just a work
information.
session. So for the council meeting next Tuesday, I'll just have a report kind of recapping this discussion. And then based on that, Aaron and I will talk about next steps on, I don't know if we need an additional work session or, we'll just remain this to planning for a formal public hearing and then, reading of that, so.
So right now, this is still in council's hands. If they choose to, they'll remand it back to us for a public hearing and we'll go from there.
My only final comment is I would want to hear the recommendations from the short-term rental committee. If, anybody that builds anything residential over a business guaranteed to be additional short-term rental.
The characteristic of Center Street, if you want a small history lesson, is very much accommodations over businesses for a long, long time. They weren't short-term rentals most of the time, they were year-round type rentals. But it's always been, and a lot of people liked it being on Center Street because it gave light and people on Center Street all the time when the businesses were closed. So that was the thought they had at that point too. A lot of it had residential over the top of business.
Thank you for the discussion.
So y'all think you just leave?
That's right. Yeah. We're done.
The guy that-
Yep.